Hello, everyone. I'm Jamie Flinchbaugh, host of People Solve Problems, and I'm here with our guest, Melia Tourangeau. How are you today?
I'm great. Good to see you, Jamie.
Good to see you. So I'm particularly excited about this. This will, I think, stand out for our listeners as something a little different because of your background and your role. So you were appointed president and CEO of the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra in May of 2015. The first woman and the youngest CEO in the symphony's 129-year history, which is amazing. I've been to a couple of your performances, and I've loved both performances and the hall. Now in your 10th season, leading the Pittsburgh Symphony, you've led two strategic planning processes, successfully piloted the orchestra through the challenges of COVID, and launched a multi-year financial recovery plan, which is currently being executed, all while maintaining and growing the international reputation of the orchestra. Particularly tough times for in-person performance groups, and lots of changes in the performance market as it is. So really excited to touch on your story today. So
thank you.
Yeah. So let's talk about maybe a particularly difficult problem that you've had to deal with, and kind of how do you navigate whatever you would describe as a particularly hard problem.
Well, in thinking about this question, certainly I think the most challenging problem we had was when I first arrived with the Pittsburgh Symphony about 10 years ago. The orchestra was recovering from the 2008 recession. And, as you come into a new organization, you look at the financials, you look at the audit, you think you understand exactly what the financial condition is. And there's always surprises, and you are also kind of prepared to whatever those surprises may be. But the orchestra hadn't done any long-term financial planning into the future. It was all retrospective. And so one of my first tasks when I came on board was, let's do a 5-year financial plan moving forward. I knew that there was a structural deficit of about $1 million on a $30 million budget. Totally seems solvable, from on the outset. But there were several headwinds that the orchestra was being faced with, of revenue streams that were going away. And different board members, knew about different things. And there were some things that were buried in the audit that weren't exactly clear. And I can touch on a number of them, but in essence, the structural deficit was more around $5 million a year. And when you took that out on a 5-year trajectory and the revenue streams going away, there was no plan to solve for those financial challenges. I'm brand new in the city. A big part of my job is fundraising. 75% of our budget comes from charitable sources, either from our endowment or government support, or 50% is from contributions. So I know the orchestra; they have a great reputation, worldwide reputation, a huge history, obviously, but I didn't know Pittsburgh very well, and so I went to my finance committee and then to the board, and I said, okay, here's the challenge. We have to raise a new $25 million over the next 5 years in order to close the gap. I don't know Pittsburgh. Maybe we can fundraise our way out of this. And the board didn't feel like that was possible. And so after my first year here, we had a contract negotiations with the orchestra. We actually have 7 unions that we work with here at the Pittsburgh Symphony, but the musicians union is by far the largest. And it was a tough situation because I'd come in very enthusiastic, very positive, like we've got this little problem here and I can solve for this little problem. But it was a much bigger problem. And so when we approached the negotiations a year later, it was clear from my board that we had to go in with a concessionary contract approach. And the musicians were, I think, knowing we had a little problem, were ready to be, lenient and not as hard, but we actually had to go in pretty hard with a pretty big concessionary offer. And one of the worst advice I got at the time was from the president of the chair of the orchestra committee, because I said, as soon as we had a problem, I said, I really need to address this with the orchestra. They need to see what I've found, what's going on here, what the trajectory is looking like before walking into negotiations. And he said, I really don't advise you to do that because it's going to look like posturing. And so I didn't. And instead, that was probably the worst advice I ever got, because I went into the negotiations with our team and our lawyers and with a big concessionary ask that was completely explosive and eventually led to a strike. And the orchestra hadn't been on strike since the 1970s. I'm 1 year in. I've got this huge financial challenge and a work stoppage. And most people in my position that are in a work stoppage, after you're done, you're the scapegoat and you're out. And so I was fully prepared, for that. And so the big problem obviously was the financial challenge, but the bigger problem was once we got to a resolution, which took 55 days, 55 of the most painful days of my career, then it was about rebuilding. And I think the fact that I am still here after 10 years is a testament to the power of being able to rebuild and what it takes to make that happen, and how we got to stronger footing ultimately.
Yeah, that's a credible story. And yeah, certainly a testament. Very few leaders, sort of survive going through all that and remain for a long term. That's a lot of stakeholders. You've got the community, you've got the board, you've got 7 unions. Most people might have to deal with 2 unions. 7 gets super complicated. Just in that story, again, being a new leader, consistent with the advice that you got, like, hey, don't ruffle too many feathers, don't scream too loud about the problem. What gave you the confidence to be so clear that the problem was that significant?
Well, essentially it was cash flow was going to be a problem. If the choice was either, we have to find the cash because all lines of liquidity had been totally extended at that point, including, a $6.5 million line of credit that was fully extended. There was very little, like we were taking a 7% draw off of our endowment, which is not prudent. We should be more like 4.5% or 5%. And from that, I will say it allowed us to, I basically went, and this goes to, one of your other questions is how do you lead? And I think I really believe in, I don't have all the answers to every problem, and you've got to bring the right people into the room and have the right conversations to get the best input possible. And when we built this new 5-year, recovery plan, some of the things that were, we had a liquidity issue. We were drawing too much off of our endowment. We needed to bolster our earned revenue and our contributed revenue sources. But as an example, if we took our endowment draw from a 7% to a 5% draw, that's a $2 million cash that I've got to find the replacement for. And so one of my board members said, what if we just took the drawdown 0.1% a year? It's we take a 12-quarter trailing average on our draw every year. And so we've been doing that for 10 years. And, we're just getting to 6% now. And we're just going to keep going. It's a long-term strategy, but it's one that has not impacted our cash flow. And in fact, has been able to allow the endowment to continue to build the way it needs to. And it's giving confidence in donors to give to the endowment because we have the endowment is about $152 million now. And it's a huge for the long-term sustainability of the orchestra. It's critical. So I'm not sure if I actually answered your question there, but I think, that's bringing people together to help come up with the solution is kind of how I lead and finding a path forward together.
Yeah, that's great. So let's talk about that, bringing people together a little bit more. Is it everybody in the same room? Is it, just listening to people from different constituencies? Do you shove everybody in a room and, spend the weekend brainstorming solutions? How do you actually sort of, I'll say, procedurally approach that collaboration?
Yeah. I've I think it's hard to get everybody in the room because if you have, 50 voices in the room, you never come up with any solution. It has to be smaller conversations, and then making sure the right combinations are together to continue that. We had as an example, we just had a meeting last week about a structural change that we're thinking about on our staff, and it's a pretty big deal and it's a pretty radical change. And so before moving forward, I brought together 4 different members of my board: my chair of the finance committee, my chair of strategic planning, uh, let's see, the chair of the investment committee, and then a longtime board member who has been on the board for 30 years and is just deeply committed to the art form. And so having those different voices, and my board chair, who is a chief marketing officer, and owned his own marketing firm. So, the right voices to be able to get some real practical feedback on a decision that we need to make. And I, there was a lot of positive and then there was some negative, and that's exactly the kind of input you need in order to move forward. And we are moving forward, and I can't talk about it right now, but hopefully we'll see some good results in the next year or so because of this decision that we're making. So
Fantastic. Well, it takes a lot of openness and engagement to lead that way, which certainly has proved itself beneficial to the organization. Even within that story and beyond, you have a lot of different problems to prioritize. You've kind of framed some of it as short-term versus long-term, but there's other dimensions to prioritization as well. You don't have a gigantic organization of resources to go just send off and solve problems. So how do you prioritize, what to work on or what's most important in the big sea of problems and challenges?
yeah, I mean, I think that's probably running a nonprofit, even though we're a large nonprofit. Resources are always scarce, and I think the trap you get into is the urgent taking over the critical. Putting out fire. It's really easy to just kind of put the fires out every day. And what's in front of me today, and what have I got to do to so to be able to take the space and have the time to be thinking through a longer term strategy. And frankly, for our organization, we have a 10-year now financial recovery plan from COVID. It's a long-term strategy because we just can't, our expenses are still 8% down from pre-COVID, and our expenses are up 12%. So, you're not going to find that gap closure sustainably in a year or 2 or 5 even. So it's really a longer term strategy. So, right now we've got it in math form, and that you can make anything work through a math equation. And now the hard work begins of how do you execute. And it is, it's constantly having that long-term plan, in front of you, but then what are the short-term priorities to get you to that, that 6-month, that year-long, that 5-year goal. And when things aren't going as, planned, how do you pivot and where do you pivot? And then really key is transparency when things are working and when they're not working. And then again, asking for help and feedback. That's why I have a board of experts and that's what I need their help with. A lot of orchestras, a lot of nonprofits, I would say, having a board, it's about, noses in, fingers out, but having a board feel like they can contribute and be engaged is really important. So that's how I work.
Yeah, finding ways to leverage the board is important. And the phrase "the show must go on," comes to mind because I imagine so many people are focused on the next performance, the next weekend, the next hour.
Right.
But yeah, where's the 10-year plan? That's a very different lift required from a leadership standpoint. So really interesting. And of course, as you mentioned, revenue's down, expenses are up, got this 10-year financial plan, whether it's that kind of a problem or an operational one, a marketing one, anything else. How do you approach breaking it down in a way that either you or your board can more easily digest and do something about?
Mhm. Um, yeah, it can be overwhelming if you're, especially when they're big, big, big challenges that aren't easy to solve. And so I will say that I have to remind myself why we're all here. And for me, it's sitting in the concert hall and hearing the orchestra. And it's getting to know these musicians and these artists. And be the reason why I got into this business in the first place is because I, was an aspiring musician. I couldn't make a living at it. And I actually found my strength is much more in supporting the artists and being and understanding their lives, their lifestyles, and celebrating their accomplishments. And so, um, you know, I when things get really, really frustrating or really tough, I always go back to the concert hall and just listen to the product. And especially this orchestra is the best orchestra I've ever worked for artistically. And the people here are amazing. And so it's really easy to get motivated again. Um, but as far as like technically, how do I break down a challenge and try to solve for it? Um, you know, I it depends on what the challenge is. And if it's a challenge that's in my wheelhouse, I feel like, okay, here are some various action points that I can take. If it's not in my wheelhouse, it's like, who do I need to talk to get some advice or feedback or expertise? Who do we need to bring on as a staff member or as a consultant or just as a volunteer? Um, and then um, and then putting an action plan in place that everybody can be accountable for. And then if watching the progress and where you are in your goals. And again, if things aren't working, you pivot and you change and you switch direction. And one of the things that I think it gets tricky is, especially say it's a new product line that we're doing. We've got this new series called Disrupt, which is, really trying to adjust, put a concert format in place that comes from a lot of market research about what we have heard our audiences want, which is they want to have some context. They want it to be a little more casual. They want speaking from the stage. They want a little stage drama, whether it's lighting or video or whatever. They want to be able to bring their drinks in the hall. And so we've created this product. They want it shorter. So it's, a shorter concert. Still the hardcore repertoire, but it's a completely different way to experience classical music. Well, when we first, posed this idea to do this series, a lot of my staff said, oh, we did that, 15 years ago and it didn't work. Or we did this, that sounds like this series and this is what happened and then it stopped and what have you. So we made a decision with Disrupt. I said, we're going to do this for 5 years and we're going to put measurements in place and we're going to put a business plan in place for this product. And it was a huge lift for the organization just to be able to execute on it, because we're used to putting on concerts, regular concerts, and we can do that in our sleep. But doing something new and different and innovative, it's really hard for this team. And so it was a huge, heavy lift. And we're not like where we want to be, but it's definitely getting traction. And we're just starting our 3rd year on it. And it's a really great product line. So I'm hopeful that it will continue to go in the right direction. And we are shifting. It was on Saturday nights. We're going to move one to Thursday nights because Thursdays are the new Fridays downtown Pittsburgh. And so we're adjusting, things like that to test the product and see if we can make it more successful. But it's a very cool event. You should come sometime.
Yeah, it sounds like a great event. It sounds like a great approach. Sort of commit, but also experiment, and find a way to be innovative in a space that typically isn't, and in an organization at almost 130 years has a lot of traditions. But all of that stems back to what you started with there, which was the purpose of the organization and supporting the musicians. And I love the grounding of, whenever I'm stuck or frustrated, I go sit and listen and remind myself why I'm here. So that's just a fantastic note to end on. We all need to find our purpose to do these hard things, to lead through these hard challenges, like the couple of major crises you've faced and are working your way through. So, really appreciate you sharing your story, your examples, your leadership, and I wish you and the symphony all the best.
Thank you.
Are you a leader looking to level up your skills? Discover the J. Flinch Learning Lab, your gateway to insightful video courses on culture change, management systems, problem solving, and much more. Immerse yourself into content created by me and transform your leadership approach. Ready to grow? Visit jflinch.com/learning lab and use code PODCAST for an exclusive 30% discount. Invest in your leadership journey today.